great mid-range growl that is bringing out of the bass. And that's boosting some of those mids to fill in where the guitars necessarily are, or maybe lacking. In fact, I think we cut around this sort of 650 area on the guitars, so filling it in with bass where it was less of a wind down a hallway sound is sort of how we keep that frequency in there in a nice way. Welcome back to Mixing Emo 2.0, where in these videos I go through every aspect of this mix. So we've done drums, we've done guitars, and now we're on to bass. So bass is pretty simple. In this one, because it's like an old school emo-y type song, I haven't split the bass into sub and upper, or sub, mid, and upper, like you see with metal. I've just gone for the one bass tone. And it starts off with a DI straight from Punk Bass from Submission Audio, which is, I think it's a Fender P bass. It sounds awesome. This is the DI by itself. So really good. I use Program Bass. I find it's easier, and the tuning helps me keep my guitars in tune when I record them. So I always check my DIs against this because it's I know that it's going to be in tune with the rest of the world, and I'm not just esoterically in my little studio recording everything in tune with itself, but then not necessarily with everything else in the world. So first thing I used for this was Parallax, because I wanted it to be a little bit like a psycho bass tone, but not quite. But a little bit of that in there. If I wanted a more sort of classic pop punky bass tone, I'd probably use maybe an Ampeg, something like that. But I wanted a little bit of that distorted bass. So this is the tone with Parallax. So Parallax is such a good plugin. You've got the mid distortion, high distortion, and then you've got a drive here. So I've turned off the high drive. With that on, it gets a little too metal. Let me show you. Which is cool, and I love it. But for this, it was a little bit too much. Mid drive, just a smidge. Because again, this can get a little bit crazy, but it does sound cool. I didn't want to go overboard. I still wanted almost like a natural sounding psycho metal bass. That, by the way, is great for fleshing out the mids of your guitars, or the low mids of your guitars, if you lack a bit of energy there. And then low, which is clean anyway, and then you can compress the low, so you don't have to use you have to necessarily split the bass and then limit the sub of the bass, which you'll do in metal to keep that low end consistent, or use like a multi-band compressor and only affect the lows. You can just put the compression in straight here in Parallax. That's cool. I probably haven't touched this low pass so that it's affecting 200 hertz and below. And then this is how you affect the level of the low, which, as you can see there, that does that too. And then on the EQ, I've pushed to 500 because that was with the bass and guitars in, I felt like we're just missing a bit of that 500, which usually isn't nice, but I think I just needed a bit of it there. So that's why I boosted it on that sort of post equalizer here that you get in the plugin. Let me show you what 500 sounds like. So I'll pull 500 out and put it back in so you can hear what I'm actually adding. See, without it, when you pull that out, you get great, you get suddenly a really nice lower and upper part of the bass. But in the mix, you're missing that. I felt like I needed that. It wasn't quite there in the guitars, and I needed that to. There's a sort of presence in the bass and guitars around that area where it doesn't sound nice, but you need that to fill out the mix because you don't necessarily have it in the other elements, for this genre at least. Okay, then that goes into a Pro Q3. Something I am internally struggling or fighting with is whether or not I want to make room for the kick and the bass so that they can live together. Sometimes I love how it sounds and it locks in. Sometimes it kind of kills my low end. So I'm not entirely sure that there's a hard and fast rule to this, but I think if you can hear the sub or you put it in your car or it's on headphones and you can just hear a bit of a build up, or the kick, the low end of the kick is sort of disappearing when the bass is in, maybe it's a good time to sort of notch that kick frequency out of your bass. So I've tried to strategically put the bass above the kick, which is why this low pass filter here is sort of making room for that sub of the kick. And I didn't do that much of a roll off on the kick. If you go back to the kick video, you'll see how I mix the kick. And then this 50 hertz here, I was pushing that with the kick, so I've pulled it out of the bass, because without that, I was getting way too much of a build up. When the kick was hitting, I could hear it blowing the sub of my mix out a little bit. And then eventually it became a minus 5 dB cut, with going back and forth to the car and testing it in different environments. And then this boost here, because I lost so much from that 50 cut, I needed some of that low end back. So that's why I've got this boost here to make sure that this 50 doesn't kill everything. And then this will be, this is a dynamic EQ bit here. So bringing out some low resonant frequencies that will be on certain notes. So let's hear what this EQ is doing. It's off and I'll turn it on. And the fact that you can't tell too obviously what's happening is a good sign. See, only really is affecting that very low end of the bass, and just making sure that the low end of my mix is clean with the kick. Let's play the kick as well. And then with that, we'll see what how this 50 hertz cut is making room for it down there. You can just about hear that the kick does get a little thinner. With the guitars in as well, it's a bit more obvious. But if we just listen to the low end of my mix, it might be a little bit more obvious what I'm doing. So depending on what you're listening on, you might not have really heard much, but it's just feels, and it's more of a feeling than a definite something you can definitely hear, but it just feels less built up and tense. It sort of relaxes the sub a little bit and sort of slots things in place. Kind of really hard to explain, but I think the more and more you mix the low end of your songs and pay close attention, the more you'll be able to sort of feel what that does. Okay, let's hear what that low end boost is doing. Bringing back some of that low roundness that was lost from this cut. So that's why the cut hasn't been too detrimental, because I've compensated for it in a different area. Hence, and that's sort of how you place the bass above the kick. You emphasize a different area of the bass. They don't, sometimes it's cool if both the kick and the bass are emphasizing in the same sort of frequency range. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes you sort of have to just move one up. And then let's hear what this 170 hertz cut is doing. So you can see it's definitely in dynamic mode, because there's a note towards the end of that it's really starting to move on. Let's hear it in solo. It's that duh, duh, duh note is where that needed taming. Without it, it sort of muddies up the low end. So I would have just found, listening to the bass, I would have heard that build up. So let's turn that off. You'll hear that build up on that note, and that's why that was needed. There, did you hear that? That did that. Just a little bit of a build up there in the muddiness. So that's why this counteracts it. Yeah, definitely smooths that out. And then some cool compression on the bass. Start with the bass preset, I always do, on the 1176. I love the 1176 on bass. So I'll start with that bass preset, and I'll bring the attack, I'll slow it down by bringing it nearer to 1 so that I can get enough of the transient emphasized. So I want the bass to drive. And then the release as close to 7, as quick as possible. That's where all the energy comes out of this plugin. When you got the release all the way up to 7, it's like it really does start to slam. Let's hear this off and on. That's bringing the bass forward, you know, really making it, every note is up there in your, like right in your face. And if you listen to the transient, you can hear it gives you a cool transienty vibe. Transient as in the transient of a note, not transient as in, you know, psychedelic. It sounds like you're digging the bass out more, which is why that's cool. And then we've got an EQ. This one of my favorite EQs that you'll see a lot on my mixes, and that's boosting some of those mids to fill in where the guitars necessarily are or maybe lacking. In fact, I think we cut around this sort of 650 area on the guitars, so filling it in with bass where it was less of a wind down a hallway sound is sort of how we keep that frequency in there in a nice way. Great mid-range growl that is bringing out of the bass. I really like that. And then again, that's running into a bass bus here with warm tube, just like the guitars. In fact, I think that might even be copied over. 12.27%. Is that the same as the guitars? It is. Oh, 12.22. Well, there you go. Near enough. And that's again just a bit of analog saturation, because in the box mixes you can get some analog vibe out of them with these really cool plugins that they have now. You know, in the box is doesn't need to be sniffed at. Yeah, that's it for bass. Thank you for watching. We've got vocals coming up. We've got mix bus and mastering coming up. So make sure you subscribe so you don't miss those, as long as you've been actually enjoying them, of course, so far. And thank you very much for watching. I'll see you at the next one.